She was forced to marry a billionaire who couldn't even open his eyes. But no one warned her what would happen when he finally did. Lena Carter never imagined her life would change inside a hospital room filled with silence and machines. One signature turned her into the wife of a powerful CEO lying in a coma, someone she had never met, in a world that never wanted her. To them, she was nothing more than a replacement, a mistake waiting to be erased. But while everyone else gave up on him, she stayed. And when the man who was supposed to never wake up finally opened his eyes, everything began to unravel. She wasn't supposed to matter, he wasn't supposed to remember. And yet, the truth neither of them expected would change both their lives forever. She was forced to marry a billionaire who couldn't even open his eyes. But no one told her what would happen when he finally woke up. Lena Carter never thought her life would shift in a quiet hospital room, surrounded by machines and whispers. One signature made her the wife of a powerful CEO in a coma, a stranger from a world that never accepted her. To them, she was just a placeholder, someone easy to replace. But while everyone else walked away, she stayed. And when the man who was never supposed to wake up opened his eyes, everything started to fall apart. She wasn't meant to matter, he wasn't meant to remember. But the truth they never saw coming would change everything. The first thing Lena Carter noticed was how quiet everything felt. Not the kind of quiet she was used to. The late-night stillness in her small Brooklyn apartment when the neighbors finally stopped arguing, or the brief hush between subway trains rattling beneath the street. This was a different kind of silence. Clean, controlled, expensive. The kind that made you feel like you didn't belong in it. She stood just inside the glass doors of Whitmore Medical Tower, her worn sneakers leaving faint traces of melted slush on the polished marble floor. Outside, Manhattan was wrapped in a gray winter morning, cars honking, people rushing, steam rising from the streets. But in here, everything was muted, as if the building itself decided what noise was allowed to exist. A nurse passed by, her eyes flicking briefly to Lena's coat, too thin for the cold, slightly faded at the cuffs, before continuing without a word. Lena tightened her grip on the strap of her bag. She had been called here with no explanation, just a message delivered through the hospital billing office. Come immediately. It concerns your mother. That was enough. Her mother was the only reason she had run across 3 subway lines, skipped her shift at the soup kitchen, and ignored the ache in her chest that told her something about this felt wrong. Very wrong, Miss Carter. The voice came from behind her, smooth, practiced, and cold in a way that didn't need to raise itself to command attention. Lena turned. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stood there holding a tablet. His hair was silver at the temples, his expression carefully neutral, like someone who had spent a lifetime delivering news that people didn't want to hear. Yes, Lena said cautiously. That's me. He studied her for a moment. Not unkindly, but not warmly either. More like he was confirming the detail on a list. Please come with me. No explanation. No greeting, just an expectation. Lena hesitated for half a second, then followed. They walked through hallways that seemed to stretch endlessly, lined with glass walls and soft lighting. Everything gleamed. Everything looked untouched. Even the air smelled different, like antiseptic and something faintly floral. She tried not to notice how out of place she felt, tried not to think about the fact that 1 week of treatment here probably cost more than she made in a year. They stopped in front of a private room at the end of the corridor. The man opened the door without knocking. After you, Lena stepped inside, and immediately felt the air change again. Cooler, heavier, quieter. The room was large, more like a suite than a hospital space. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the skyline. Machines hummed softly in the background, their lights blinking in steady rhythms. And in the center of it all was the bed. Lena's eyes found him before she even realized she was looking. Harrison Whitmore. She knew the name. Everyone did. His face had been on magazine covers, business news, billboards. The kind of man people talked about like he wasn't real. Too rich, too powerful, too untouchable. Now he lay completely still, pale, unmoving. A thin tube ran along his arm, wires tracing his chest. The rise and fall of his breathing was slow, mechanical, as if even that required assistance. For a moment, Lena forgot why she was here, forgot the man behind her, forgot everything. All she could think was, he looks human. Not like the headlines, not like the billionaire everyone feared or admired, just a man, broken. What? What is this? She asked softly. The man stepped forward beside her. My name is Daniel Reeves, he said. I represent the Whitmore family. Lena turned to him, confusion tightening her chest. Why am I here? What does this have to do with my mother? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tapped something on his tablet, then held it out toward her. A document. Dense, legal, official. At the top, in bold letters, it read, Marriage Agreement. Lena blinked. I don't, she started. I think there's been a mistake. There has not, Daniel replied calmly. She looked back at the bed, at Harrison, then back at the document. Her stomach dropped. You want me to marry him? She said, the words barely forming. Yes. The room felt smaller suddenly. The quiet pressed in on her. That doesn't make any sense, Lena said, shaking her head. I don't know him. He's not even awake. Daniel's expression didn't change. This arrangement is strategic. Lena almost laughed, but the sound caught in her throat. I'm sorry, she said, taking a step back. I think you've got the wrong person. I'm nobody. I work at a soup kitchen. I clean motel rooms on weekends. I can't just… You can, Daniel interrupted gently. Then his tone shifted, just slightly. And you will. Lena froze. There it was, the thing she had felt from the moment she walked into the building. Not a request, a decision already made. Her pulse quickened. No, she said, firmer this time. I won't. I don't care how much money you have. You can't just pick someone off the street and tell them who to marry. Daniel lowered the tablet. For the first time, there was something behind his eyes. Not anger, not impatience, just inevitability. Your mother, he said quietly, is currently receiving advanced neurological treatment on the 6th floor. Lena's breath caught. You know that already, he continued. What you may not know is that the Whitmore Foundation is funding that treatment in full. A cold sensation spread through her chest. No, she whispered. If that funding were to be withdrawn… Daniel went on, his voice still calm, still measured. Her care would be significantly affected. Lena shook her head, backing away again. You wouldn't do that. We would prefer not to, he said. Silence filled the room. Heavy, unforgiving. Lena looked at Harrison again, at the man who had no idea any of this was happening, at the machines that kept him alive, at the life she didn't belong to. Then she thought of her mother, the hospital bed, the way her hands trembled when the pain got too strong, the way she still smiled anyway. Lena's chest tightened until it hurt. This is wrong, she said, her voice breaking. Daniel didn't respond, because he didn't need to. They both knew it. She stared at the document again, the words blurred together. Marriage, legal, binding, permanent. Her hand trembled as she reached for the pen. For a second, she stopped, looked back at Harrison, studied his face. You don't even know me, she whispered. He didn't move, didn't react, didn't hear her. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. I don't know you either, she said. Then with a shaky breath, she signed. The pen scratched against the paper, louder than it should have been. Final. Irreversible. Daniel took the document back, nodding once. "It's done," he said. Lena lowered her hand slowly, the weight of what she had just agreed to settling over her like a storm. She looked at Harrison one more time, at the stranger who was now her husband, and in the silence of that perfect, expensive room, one question echoed louder than anything else. Why her? Why would a world like this choose someone like her? The question followed Lena all the way out of the building. The glass doors slid open behind her with a soft hiss, and suddenly the noise of Manhattan rushed back in. Car horns, footsteps, distant sirens. The cold air hit her face, sharp and real, like a slap that pulled her out of whatever dream she had just signed her name into. She stood there for a moment, unmoving, the city blurring around her. Married. The word didn't feel real. Nothing about this felt real. Her hands were still trembling when she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. The screen lit up with a cracked corner she kept meaning to fix, but never had the money for. 3 missed calls, all from the hospital floor where her mother was staying. Lena swallowed hard and pressed call back. The line rang once, twice, then, "Miss Carter?" A nurse's voice answered. "Yes, this is Lena. Is my mom okay?" There was a pause, just long enough to make her heart tighten. "She's stable," the nurse said. "Her treatment will continue as scheduled." Lena closed her eyes. Relief washed over her. But it wasn't clean. It came tangled with something heavier, something that made her chest ache instead of ease. "Thank you," she whispered. When the call ended, she lowered the phone slowly. It was already happening. The decision she had made in that quiet room upstairs was already shaping her life. She turned and started walking, not really thinking about where she was going. The sidewalks were crowded, people brushing past her in expensive coats, talking into wireless headsets, checking watches that probably cost more than her rent for a year. No one looked at her twice. No one ever did. By the time she reached the subway entrance, her fingers had gone numb from the cold. The train ride back to Brooklyn felt longer than usual. The car rattled, the lights flickering overhead, the smell of metal and old air wrapping around her. A man across from her dozed off with his head against the window. A woman nearby scrolled endlessly through her phone. Life, continuing, like nothing had changed. But everything had. When Lena stepped out onto the street near her apartment, the sky was already dimming into early evening. The neighborhood looked the same as it always did. Graffiti along the brick walls, a flickering streetlight on the corner, the sound of a basketball bouncing somewhere down the block. Home, if you could call it that. She walked up the narrow steps to her building and pushed the door open. The hallway smelled faintly of fried food and old carpet. "Lena!" Mrs. Alvarez's voice echoed from down the hall. The older woman poked her head out of her apartment, her gray hair tied back loosely. "You're late today," she said, concern creasing her face. "Everything okay?" Lena forced a small smile. "Yeah, just hospital stuff." Mrs. Alvarez nodded knowingly. "Your mama?" "Yeah." "Well, come by later if you need anything," she said gently. "I made extra soup." Lena's smile softened. "Just a little more genuine this time." "I will. Thank you." She continued down the hall, stopping at her door. The lock stuck like it always did, and she had to jiggle the key before it finally turned. Inside, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Her mother's things were still exactly where she had left them. A folded sweater on the chair, a mug on the counter, the faint scent of lavender that never quite faded. Lena set her bag down slowly. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the small space that had always felt too cramped, until it suddenly felt too empty. Then she exhaled, long and shaky, and moved. Routine. That was how she survived. She changed into her worn work clothes and headed back out, locking the door behind her. There was still a shift waiting for her at the soup kitchen, and she couldn't afford to lose that job too. The streets were colder now, the wind cutting sharper as night settled in. By the time she reached the small community center, her fingers were stiff, but she pushed the door open anyway. Warmth hit her immediately, along with noise. People talking, plates clinking, the low hum of life pressed together in a room that didn't have enough space for all of it. "Hey, Lena," Marcus, the kitchen supervisor, waved from behind the counter. "You're late." "I know," she said, tying an apron around her waist. "I'm here now." He studied her for a second, like he could tell something was off, but didn't press. "Grab a tray," he said. "We're slammed tonight." Lena nodded and got to work, ladling soup, handing out bread, smiling at people who needed it more than she did. A young boy came through the line, maybe 7 or 8, his coat too big for him. He looked up at her with wide eyes. "Is there extra bread?" he asked quietly. Lena glanced at the tray. There wasn't. But she broke her own piece in half and slipped it onto his plate. "Here you go," she said softly. His face lit up. "Thank you." She nodded, watching him walk away, something warm flickering in her chest despite everything. "Lena," the voice behind her was sharper this time. She turned. Marcus stood there, arms crossed. "You can't keep doing that," he said. "We've got to ration. There's not enough for everyone if you start giving away your own share." Lena lowered her gaze. "I know, do you?" he asked, not unkindly, but firmly. "Because you've got to take care of yourself too." She swallowed. "I'm fine." Marcus sighed, shaking his head. "You always say that." He walked off before she could respond. Lena stood there for a moment, staring down at the empty tray in her hands. "Take care of yourself." The words felt distant, unfamiliar, like something meant for someone else. The shift ended late. By the time Lena stepped back outside, the streetlights had come on, casting long shadows across the pavement. The air smelled like rain, though it hadn't started yet. She pulled her coat tighter around her and started the walk back home. Halfway down the block, she heard raised voices, a man arguing with a store owner, his words slurred, his frustration spilling over. "Just give me the food," he snapped. "I said I'll pay you later." "You've said that 3 times this week," the owner replied, shaking his head. "I can't keep doing this." Lena slowed. She knew that tone, that edge, desperation. Without thinking, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the few dollars she had left from her last paycheck. It wasn't much. It was barely enough. But she stepped forward anyway. "I've got it," she said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. The store owner frowned. "You sure?" Lena nodded, handing over the money. The man stared at her, stunned. "You don't have to," he started. "It's okay," she said. He hesitated, then took the bag of food, his voice softer now. "Thank you." Lena gave a small nod and stepped back. No one else said anything. No one else stepped in. They never did. As she continued walking, her pockets now empty, the wind picked up, tugging at her coat. For a brief moment, the weight of everything pressed down on her. The apartment, the bills, her mother, the marriage, a life she didn't choose, and a world that had never once chosen her. She stopped under a flickering streetlight, staring out at the dark street ahead. Her breath came out in a quiet cloud. Lena wrapped her arms around herself. And for the first time since leaving the hospital, she let the question settle fully in her chest. If kindness had never saved her before, why would it matter now? The question stayed with Lena long after she climbed the stairs to her apartment that night. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the signature, her name inked beneath words she couldn't take back. She heard the quiet hum of machines in that hospital room. She saw Harrison Whitmore's still face, frozen somewhere between life and something else. By morning, the world hadn't changed, but her place in it had. A black sedan was waiting outside her building. Lena noticed it the second she stepped onto the sidewalk. It didn't belong there. Not in a neighborhood where most cars had dents and stories and years behind them. This one gleamed, untouched, like it had never known struggle. The driver stepped out as soon as he saw her. "Miss Carter." Her stomach tightened. "I have a shift," she said immediately. "I can't just—" "You won't need to return to your previous employment," the man replied calmly, opening the rear door. Lena frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means your responsibilities have changed." Responsibilities. The word felt heavy, like something being placed on her shoulders without her permission. She looked back at her building for a second. At the cracked steps, the flickering light, the familiar mess of a life she understood, even if it wasn't easy. Then she looked at the car again, and slowly, she got in. The ride felt longer than it should have. Manhattan faded behind them, replaced by quieter roads, larger houses, and neighborhoods that seemed untouched by time or hardship. The streets grew wider, the trees stood taller. Even the air felt different, cleaner somehow. Lena pressed her forehead lightly against the window, watching it all pass by. She had spent her entire life on one side of the city. Now she was crossing into another world entirely. When the car finally turned into a long, gated driveway, her breath caught. The gates opened automatically, smooth and silent, revealing a property that stretched farther than she could see at first glance. The estate, rose in the distance. White stone, tall windows, perfect symmetry. It didn't look like a home. It looked like something out of a movie. Lena sat still as the car rolled forward, her heart beating faster with every passing second. This is where they live. This is where he lives. The car came to a stop at the front entrance. The driver stepped out again, opening her door. "Welcome, Mrs. Whitmore." The title hit her harder than she expected. Mrs. Whitmore. It didn't belong to her. It never had. But now it did. And there was nothing she could do about it. She stepped out slowly, her shoes barely making a sound on the stone steps. The front doors opened before she could reach them, revealing a woman standing inside, elegant, poised. Her silver hair was styled perfectly, her posture straight, her expression calm but unreadable. "Lena Carter," the woman said. It wasn't a question. Lena nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Margaret Whitmore," she said. "Harrison's mother." There was no warmth in her voice, but there wasn't cruelty either. Just distance. "Come in," Margaret said, turning without waiting. Lena followed. The inside of the house was even more overwhelming. High ceilings, polished floors, art lining the walls that Lena didn't understand, but knew had to be worth more than everything she owned combined. Everything was perfect and completely unfamiliar. "Your room has been prepared," Margaret said as they walked. "Staff will assist you with anything you need." Lena hesitated. "I don't need—" "You will accept what is necessary," Margaret interrupted gently, though there was an edge beneath it. "This arrangement requires appearances to be maintained." Appearances. Lena swallowed. Understood. They reached a large staircase and Margaret paused. "You will also visit Harrison daily," she continued. "His condition remains unchanged." Lena nodded slowly. "I was already planning to." Margaret studied her then. Just for a moment, something shifted in her gaze, barely noticeable. "But there." "Good," she said. Then she turned and walked away. Lena stood there alone, the silence settling around her again. Different from the hospital, but just as heavy, a housekeeper approached her shortly after, guiding her upstairs. The room she was shown into was bigger than her entire apartment, a bed that looked untouched, Closets filled with clothes she had never seen before. New, expensive, clearly not chosen by her. Shoes lined neatly along the wall. Jewelry placed carefully on a dresser. It wasn't a room, it was a life. One that had been prepared for someone else. Lena stepped inside slowly. Her fingers brushed against the fabric of one of the dresses hanging in the closet. Soft, delicate, not meant for hands like hers. "They were selected for you," the housekeeper said politely. "If anything doesn't fit, adjustments can be made." Lena nodded absently, but her chest felt tight. "They were selected," she repeated softly. "Not chosen, not hers, just given or assigned." "Would you like to see Mr. Whitmore now?" the housekeeper asked. Lena hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." The walk to his room felt different this time, longer, heavier. When she stepped inside, the machines were still there. The same quiet rhythm, the same still figure in the center of it all. Nothing had changed, except her. She walked closer, slower this time. Her shoes sank slightly into the soft carpet, muffling every step. When she reached the bed, she stopped. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Didn't know what she was supposed to be now. A stranger, a caretaker, a wife, the words still didn't fit. She looked down at him, at the man who had pulled her into a world she didn't belong to. And suddenly, the weight of everything came crashing down. "This isn't real," she whispered. He didn't move. Of course he didn't. Lena let out a quiet breath, her shoulders sinking. "They think I'm here for money," she continued, her voice softer now. "That I chose this." Her eyes stung, but she blinked the tears back. "I didn't." Silence answered her, but something about standing there, talking, felt easier than it should have, like the words had somewhere to go. "They said I have to be your wife," she went on. "I don't even know what that means." Her hand hovered for a second, before she gently adjusted the blanket at his side. Careful, instinctive, the same way she had done for her mother 100 times before. "I just know how to take care of people," she said quietly. Another pause. Longer this time, then, "And I guess that's what I'll do." Her voice steadied, just a little. Outside, the light shifted as clouds rolled in, casting a softer gray across the room. Lena stood there for a while longer, the silence no longer as suffocating as before. Still heavy, but different, less empty, as if, somehow, her presence had changed it. She looked at him one last time before turning to leave, and as her hand touched the door, she hesitated, just for a second. Then she spoke again. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "I won't leave you alone." The words lingered in the air after she stepped out, soft, simple, unnoticed. Or maybe not completely, because somewhere, deep beneath the stillness, something shifted. So small, it could have been nothing, or the beginning of everything. Lena didn't notice it, not then. To her, it was just another quiet moment in a room that never changed. Another breath, another blink of the machine lights, another second that passed without anything happening. That was how the days went. Slow, repetitive, unseen. By the third morning, Lena had learned the rhythm of the house. The staff moved like clockwork, early footsteps in the hallways, soft voices behind closed doors, trays carried in and out without sound. No one lingered, no one spoke unless necessary, and no one looked at her for longer than a second. She noticed that part. The way conversations paused when she entered a room. The way eyes flicked toward her, then away, like she was something they didn't quite understand, or didn't want to. She had seen that look before, all her life, but here it felt sharper, colder, more deliberate. Mrs. Whitmore rarely spoke to her. When she did, it was always brief, precise, like Lena was a detail to be managed rather than a person to be known. "Breakfast is at 8. You'll accompany me to the hospital this afternoon. Do not speak to the press if they appear. Simple instructions. No warmth. No hostility either. Just distance. Lena followed them all without question, because questioning anything in this house felt like stepping onto thin ice. But every afternoon, without fail, she went to Harrison's room. That was the only place that didn't feel like it was watching her. The only place where she could breathe. She had started bringing small things with her. A book she found in the library. Something about old jazz records and the musicians behind them. She didn't know if Harrison liked jazz, but it felt right somehow. The kind of music that filled silence without breaking it. She pulled a chair closer to the bed and began reading aloud. Her voice was soft at first, unsure, but as the words settled into the room, something shifted. Not in him, in her. It gave her something to do with the quiet, something to fill the space between heartbeats. And he said the trumpet wasn't just an instrument, she read slowly, glancing down at the page. It was a voice, one that told the truth, even when the man holding it couldn't. She paused. That's kind of beautiful, she murmured, almost to herself. The machines hummed in response. Lena looked up at him. You probably already knew that, she said. People like you always seem to know things like that. She let out a small breath, setting the book down. I don't, she added quietly. Another pause, then she reached for the washcloth sitting in the basin nearby. The nurse had shown her what to do, on gentle motions, careful pressure, respect for a body that couldn't respond. Lena dipped the cloth into warm water, wringing it out before gently brushing it across his hand. His skin was colder than she expected. Not lifeless, just distant. Like it belonged to someone far away. You should be warmer than this, she said softly. She rubbed his hand between hers, trying to bring some warmth back into it. It was instinct. The same instinct that had guided her for years. Take care of people. Even when no one was watching. Even when it didn't change anything. That afternoon, on her way back down the hallway, she heard a sharp noise, a tray hitting the floor, followed by a low cry of pain. Lena turned immediately. An older man, one of the house staff, was on his knees trying to steady himself. Dishes had scattered across the polished floor, soup spreading slowly beneath him. No one else had stopped. They walked around him, careful not to step in the mess, careful not to get involved. Lena didn't think. She moved. Hey, are you okay? She said, kneeling beside him. My knee, the man muttered, wincing. It just gave out. Don't move, Lena said gently. Let me help you. She slipped one arm around his back, steadying him, guiding him slowly into a seated position against the wall. Her movements were careful, practiced, like she had done this before, because she had, too many times to count. Does it hurt here? She asked, pressing lightly near his knee. The man flinched. Yeah, okay, Lena nodded. You probably twisted it. You need ice. She looked up. The hallway was still full, still moving, still ignoring. Can someone get ice? She called out. No one answered. Not immediately. Finally, one of the younger staff members hesitated, then turned and hurried off. Lena exhaled, focusing back on the man. You're okay, she said softly. Just breathe. He looked at her, surprised. Thank you, he whispered. Lena gave a small nod. It's nothing, but it wasn't nothing. Not to him, not to the few people who had slowed just enough to notice, and not to the woman standing at the end of the hallway, Margaret Whitmore. She hadn't said a word, hadn't moved, but her eyes were fixed on Lena, watching, measuring, seeing something she hadn't seen before. Lena didn't notice. She was too busy helping the man to his feet once the ice arrived, guiding him carefully toward a nearby chair. You should rest, she said. Don't try to walk it off. He nodded, still looking at her like he didn't quite understand what had just happened. Like kindness in a place like this didn't make sense. Lena wiped her hands on a towel and stood. For a moment, the hallway felt different, quieter, not empty, but aware. Then, just as quickly, it returned to normal. People moved again, voices resumed, and Lena went back to Harrison's room. She closed the door softly behind her. The silence welcomed her. Familiar now, comforting in its own strange way, she picked up the book again. But this time, she didn't open it right away. Instead, she walked over to the window. The sky had shifted into a soft gray, the kind that made everything feel slower, still, like the world was holding its breath. She glanced back at the bed and him. "You missed something," she said quietly. No response. "Of course, there was a man in the hallway," she went on. "He got hurt." Nobody stopped. She paused. "I did." Her fingers tightened slightly around the book. "I always do." The words came out softer than she intended, more vulnerable. "I don't know why," she admitted. "It never changes anything." She walked back to the chair and sat down, opened the book, then closed it again. "I don't think I belong here," she said after a moment. The truth of it settled in her chest. Heavy, honest. "But I'm here anyway." She looked at him, her gaze steady now. "And as long as I am—" Her voice softened. "You won't be alone." The machines continued their quiet rhythm, the same as always. But somewhere, deep beneath the surface, something responded. Not movement, not yet, just a shift, subtle, almost invisible, like a thread pulling tight, or a connection being formed. Lena didn't see it, didn't feel it. She simply reached out, adjusting the blanket once more, her touch careful and gentle, the kind of touch that didn't ask for anything in return. And for the first time since she arrived, the room didn't feel quite so empty. But somewhere else in the house, someone had started paying attention. Margaret Whitmore stood by the tall window in her private study, her hands resting lightly on the edge of a polished desk. The afternoon light stretched long across the room, casting quiet shadows that moved with the slow passing of time. She had seen it, not just the moment in the hallway, but the way Lena moved, the way she didn't hesitate, the way she helped without looking around first to see who was watching. That part was unusual. In this house, people helped when they were told to, when it was expected, when it was beneficial, not like that. Margaret exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting toward the garden below. "Interesting," she murmured. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Daniel Reeves stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You asked to see me, Mrs. Whitmore." Margaret turned. "Yes," she said. "Tell me again why she was chosen." Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second. "She was suitable," he replied. "No family ties that would complicate matters. No public profile. Financially vulnerable." Margaret's eyes sharpened slightly. "And her character?" Daniel paused. "That was not a primary consideration." Margaret nodded once. "I see." There was no judgment in her tone, but something had shifted. "Continue observing her," she said after a moment. "Closely." Daniel inclined his head. "Of course." As he turned to leave, Margaret's gaze returned to the window. Somewhere in the house, a girl who didn't belong was quietly changing things, and Margaret intended to understand exactly how. Lena didn't know any of that. She was back in Harrison's room, sitting by the window with the book open in her lap. The sky had darkened slightly, a thin drizzle beginning to tap against the glass. "And he said the music wasn't just sound," she read softly. "It was memory." She paused, glancing up. "I think I get that," she said. Her voice was steadier now than it had been the first day, more familiar with the silence, less afraid of it. I don't have a lot of things, she continued, closing the book gently. But the ones I do have, they stick. She leaned back in the chair, exhaling quietly. Like my mom's voice, she added. Even when she's asleep, I can still hear it. The machines continued their steady rhythm. Lena looked at him. You ever think about stuff like that? She asked, almost smiling at herself. I guess you don't have much of a choice right now. The faintest trace of humor lingered in her voice. It didn't last long. Her expression softened again. I wish I knew what you were like, she admitted. Before all this. Her gaze drifted over his face. You must have been something. She stood after a moment, walking slowly to the small cabinet near the wall. The nurse had shown her how to check the water basin, how to make sure everything was clean and ready, routine. It grounded her. As she worked, the door opened behind her, Lena turned, and froze. The woman standing there didn't belong to this quiet space. She carried a different kind of energy, sharp, confident, disruptive. Emily Stone, her heels clicked softly against the floor as she stepped inside, her eyes sweeping the room before landing on Lena. So, Emily said, her voice smooth but edged with something colder. You're the one, Lena straightened. Yes, she said quietly. Emily studied her for a long moment, her gaze moving slowly, taking in Lena's simple clothes, her posture, the way she stood just slightly guarded. Then she smiled, not warmly. Oh, she said, this is worse than I thought. Lena didn't respond. She had learned that silence was sometimes the safest place to stand. Emily walked closer, her eyes flicking briefly toward Harrison before returning to Lena. I leave for a few months, she continued, almost conversationally, and I come back to find a stranger in my place. Her tone sharpened slightly. A very unexpected stranger. Lena's fingers tightened at her sides. I didn't take your place, she said carefully. Emily's smile widened, just a little. No, she said, because from where I'm standing, you're wearing the title, living in the house, sitting by his bed. She tilted her head. That looks like taking my place. Lena swallowed. I didn't choose this, she said. Emily let out a soft laugh. They never do, she replied. The words landed harder than they should have, because Lena had heard them before, in different forms, from different people. She forced herself to stay still. I'm just here to help, Lena said quietly. Emily's expression shifted, just slightly, not softer, sharper. Help, she repeated. She stepped closer now, her voice lowering. Let me make something clear, she said. This family doesn't need help from someone like you. Someone like you. There it was, Lena felt it, like a familiar bruise pressed again. Still there, still tender, but she didn't flinch. I'm not here for them, Lena said. Emily's brows lifted slightly. No? She asked. Lena glanced briefly at Harrison. I'm here for him. The room went quiet. For a second, something flickered across Emily's face, not understanding, not respect, something else. Then it was gone. Of course you are, she said lightly, because that's exactly what someone in your position would say. She turned, walking slowly toward the door, but before leaving, she paused. One piece of advice, she added, glancing back over her shoulder. Don't get comfortable. Her gaze sharpened again. This situation is temporary. Then she was gone. The door closed softly behind her. Silence returned, but it felt different now. Tighter, heavier. Lena stood there for a long moment, her chest rising and falling slowly. Then she turned back to Harrison. Her expression had changed, not broken, not defeated, just quieter, more certain of something she hadn't been able to name before. They think I don't belong here, she said softly. Her voice didn't shake this time. They might be right. She stepped closer to the bed, carefully adjusting the blanket again, smoothing it with practiced hands. But I'm still here, she added. A pause, then quieter. And I'm not leaving. Outside, the rain picked up, tapping steadily against the glass. Inside, the machines continued their quiet rhythm. And somewhere beneath it all, the tension had shifted. Because this wasn't just a situation anymore. It was becoming a conflict. And Lena had just stepped into it. The house felt different after Emily left. It wasn't something Lena could explain clearly. Nothing had changed on the surface. The same quiet hallways, the same careful routines, the same distant glances from staff who still didn't quite know what to make of her. But beneath it all, something had shifted, like a storm building somewhere far off, unseen, but coming. That night, Lena stayed longer than usual in Harrison's room. The rain hadn't stopped. It pressed softly against the windows, a steady rhythm that filled the silence without breaking it. The lights in the room were dim, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor. Lena sat beside the bed, her hands folded loosely in her lap. She hadn't brought the book with her this time. For once, she didn't feel like reading. You had someone visit today, she said quietly. Her voice carried gently in the room. Softer than the rain, she said she used to belong here. A small pause. I guess she still thinks she does. Lena looked at him, at the stillness of his face, at the quiet rise and fall of his chest. She's probably right, she admitted. Another pause. Longer this time. But I'm still here. Her fingers tightened slightly. I don't know how long that'll last, she continued. People like her, they don't lose easily. The words hung in the air, then faded. Lena exhaled slowly and stood, moving closer to adjust the blanket again. Her movements had become natural now, almost automatic. Careful, gentle. The kind of care that came from years of practice, not obligation. She brushed a strand of hair away from his forehead without thinking. You're lucky, she said softly. You don't have to deal with any of this. A faint smile touched her lips. It's just me out here trying to figure it out. She stepped back, glancing at the monitor beside the bed. The steady line, the quiet rhythm. Nothing new, nothing different. Just the same, endless waiting. Lena reached for the lamp, paused, then left it on. I'll come back tomorrow, she said quietly. She turned toward the door. Her hand had just touched the handle, when something changed. At first, it was so subtle she thought she imagined it. A shift in the sound behind her. Not the machines, something else. Lena froze, slowly. She turned back. The room looked the same. Nothing had moved. Nothing had changed, except her eyes locked onto his hand. For a second, her breath stopped. Wait, she whispered. She stepped closer, her heart beginning to race. His fingers. They were still, perfectly still. Lena swallowed, forcing herself to breathe. I'm just tired, she murmured to herself. It's nothing. She took another step back, turned again toward the door. And then, it happened. A faint twitch, so small it could have been missed. But she saw it. This time she knew she saw it. Lena spun around, rushing back to the bed. Hey! Her voice trembled now. Hey! Can you hear me? She leaned closer, her eyes searching his face. Nothing, no movement, no reaction. Just the same stillness. Her heart pounded in her chest. Okay. Okay, she whispered, trying to steady herself. She reached for his hand. Warm, still. But then, another twitch. Stronger this time. Lena gasped, Oh my God, she hit the call button, her hand shaking. "Nurse," she called out. "Someone, please." Footsteps echoed in the hallway, voices rising. The door burst open, medical staff rushed in, their movements fast and precise. "What happened?" one of them asked. His hand. He moved, Lena said breathlessly. They didn't question her, didn't hesitate. Machines were checked, vitals monitored, lights brightened. The quiet room shattered into controlled chaos. "Pulse is changing. Get the doctor, now. Stay with me, Mr. Whitmore." Lena stepped back, her body pressed against the wall as everything unfolded in front of her. Her hands trembled, her breath came fast. This wasn't supposed to happen, not like this, not now. A doctor rushed in moments later, his voice calm but urgent. "Let's see." He moved to the bedside, checking pupils, monitoring responses. Then, a pause, a stillness. And suddenly, a breath. Different, stronger, not mechanical, not assisted. His chest rose on its own. The room went silent. Everyone froze, and then his eyes opened, slowly, uncertain, like someone waking from a dream that had lasted too long. Lena's heart stopped. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single instant. The billionaire, the man everyone had been waiting for, was awake. His gaze shifted, unfocused at first, then searching, confused. The doctor spoke to him, but Lena didn't hear the words. All she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat. All she could see was him, alive, present, here and then. His eyes found her. For the first time, Lena froze, their gaze locked for a single fragile second. And in that moment, everything changed. Because the man she had spent days talking to, the man she had cared for in silence, was no longer just a presence in the room. He was watching her, seeing her, and the question she had been avoiding since the beginning finally came crashing down. What happens now? The answer came faster than she expected, and it wasn't what she hoped. Harrison Whitmore didn't speak to her. Not that night, not the next morning. Not even when he was strong enough to sit up, his back supported by pillows, his eyes clearer, sharper, more aware with each passing hour. He spoke to the doctors, to the nurses, to his mother, but not to Lena. She stood in the corner of the room the next day, her hands clasped together, watching as the world reorganized itself around him. People moved differently now, faster, more attentive. The quiet reverence that had filled the room before was replaced with urgency. Life had returned, and with it, control. "How long?" Harrison asked, his voice rough but steady. 3 months, the doctor replied. "You were in a deep coma following the accident." Harrison absorbed that without much visible reaction. "And the company, it's stable," Margaret answered from beside the bed. "We ensured continuity." His gaze shifted briefly to her. A silent exchange passed between them. One Lena couldn't fully read, but could feel. Power, responsibility, expectation. Then his eyes moved again, this time toward Lena. The moment stretched. Thin, fragile. She felt it immediately. The difference. Before, his stillness had been empty. Now it was intentional. He was looking at her, not through her, not past her, at her. And there was something in his expression she couldn't ignore. Confusion, sharp, focused. "Who is she?" he asked. The words landed like a drop of cold water, simple, direct, and completely without recognition. Lena felt something inside her chest tighten. Margaret didn't answer right away. Neither did anyone else. The silence filled the room again. But this time it wasn't soft. It was heavy, awkward, waiting. Finally, Margaret spoke. "She is your wife." The words echoed louder than they should have. Harrison's gaze didn't leave Lena, but something in it changed, subtly, almost imperceptibly. "Wife." He repeated the word silently, as if testing it. Then his brow furrowed slightly. I don't remember getting married, he said. You were unconscious, Margaret replied evenly. The decision was made, under special circumstances. Harrison's eyes narrowed just a fraction. And she agreed to this? He asked. This time Lena answered. Yes, her voice was quiet, but steady. Harrison studied her again. Longer now, taking in her face, her posture, the way she stood, not confident, not submissive, just present, real, out of place. You don't look like someone who belongs in my life, he said. The words were calm, measured, not cruel, but they cut deeper because of it. Lena didn't flinch, not outwardly. I don't, she said. A flicker of something crossed his expression. Surprise, maybe, at her honesty. Then it was gone. So why are you here? He asked. The room held its breath. Lena's fingers tightened slightly, but her gaze didn't drop. Because I said I would stay, she answered. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Harrison leaned back slightly against the pillows, his eyes never leaving hers. That's not an answer, he said. Lena hesitated. Just for a second, then, your family asked me to, she said. Another partial truth. Another piece of something larger. Harrison exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting away for the first time. Of course they did, he muttered. There was no anger in his voice, just understanding, the kind that came with experience, the kind that didn't need explanations. He looked back at her again. But now, the confusion was gone, replaced by something colder. Assessment. You're being taken care of, I assume, he said. Lena blinked. What? Money, housing, security, he clarified. They wouldn't bring someone into this arrangement without compensation. The assumption landed like a weight, heavy, expected, familiar. Lena swallowed. They're taking care of my mother's treatment, she said. Harrison's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. I see. Silence stretched again, different this time, more distant, more defined. Then this makes sense, he said. Lena felt the shift before she fully understood it. What does? She asked quietly. Harrison's gaze met hers one last time. This, he said. The arrangement. His voice was calm, controlled, and completely devoid of warmth. You needed something, he continued. They needed something. It's efficient. Efficient, the word echoed in Lena's mind, reducing everything to a transaction, a calculation, a trade. She felt the sting of it, but she didn't argue, didn't defend herself, because part of her had expected this, from the moment he opened his eyes. Is that what you think? She asked softly. Harrison didn't hesitate. It's what I know. The certainty in his voice left no room for anything else, no space for doubt, no space for her. Lena nodded once, slowly, like she was accepting something she couldn't change. Okay, she said, and just like that, she stepped back, creating distance where there had once been closeness. I'll let you rest, she added. Her voice was quieter now, not broken, not angry, just distant, the same way his had been. She turned toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she didn't stop, didn't look back, not until her hand touched the handle. Then for just a second, she hesitated, her fingers tightened slightly, but she didn't speak, didn't explain, didn't fight. She just opened the door and walked out. The room fell silent behind her. Harrison watched the empty space where she had stood, his expression unreadable. But something lingered, something he didn't quite understand. Because for the first time since waking up, someone hadn't tried to convince him of anything, hadn't defended themselves, hadn't argued. She had simply left, and somehow, that unsettled him more than anything else. Harrison didn't sleep much that night, not because of pain, not because of the machines, but because of the silence she left behind. It lingered in the room long after she walked out. Quiet, steady, impossible to ignore. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the monitors, replaying the conversation in his mind. Her voice, calm, unapologetic. Not once had she tried to convince him she was innocent. Not once had she defended herself. She had simply accepted what he thought of her and left. That wasn't how people behaved when they had something to gain. Harrison turned his head slightly, eyes drifting toward the chair she had been sitting in. Empty now, something about that bothered him more than it should have. The next morning, the house returned to its usual rhythm. Doctors came and went. Staff moved quietly through the halls. Margaret checked on him twice before noon, but Lena didn't return. Not at her usual time. Not at all, Harrison noticed. He told himself he didn't care, but his eyes kept drifting toward the door anyway. By early afternoon, irritation had settled in. "Where is she?" he asked suddenly. Daniel, who had been reviewing documents nearby, looked up. "Who?" Harrison didn't hide the impatience in his voice. "My wife." The word still felt unfamiliar, unnatural. Daniel hesitated for just a moment. "I believe she is occupied elsewhere in the house." Harrison's gaze sharpened. "Doing what? I'm not certain." That answer didn't satisfy him, not even close. "Find out," Harrison said. Daniel nodded once and stepped out. The room felt quieter after he left. Too quiet. Harrison exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. This was ridiculous. He had spent years building an empire, making decisions that shaped entire industries. And now he was distracted by a woman he didn't even know. A woman who, by all logic, had inserted herself into his life for personal gain. And yet, she hadn't acted like it. That was the problem. That was what didn't fit. The door opened again, pulling him from his thoughts, but it wasn't Daniel, it was Emily. She walked in without hesitation, her presence filling the room with a different kind of energy, confident, controlled, familiar. "Harrison," she said, her voice softening as she approached. He studied her carefully. There was recognition there, not emotional, not immediate, but factual. He remembered her. "Emily," he said. Relief flickered across her face. "You remember me?" "Of course I do," he replied. She smiled, sitting down beside him. "I was so worried," she said gently. When I heard about the accident, her hand hovered briefly near his, then rested lightly on the edge of the bed instead. Careful, measured. Harrison watched her. "You left," he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Emily's expression faltered for just a second. Then she recovered. "I was scared," she admitted softly. "No one knew if you would wake up. The doctors said—" "They said a lot of things," Harrison interrupted. His tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't forgiving either. Emily's smile tightened slightly. "I'm here now," she said. Another pause, then she leaned in just slightly. "You don't have to go through this alone." Harrison's gaze flickered toward the door. Empty, still empty. Apparently, he said, "I'm not alone." Emily followed his gaze. Understanding settled in. "You mean her," she said. Harrison didn't respond. He didn't need to. Emily's expression hardened, just slightly. "She shouldn't be here," she said quietly. That got his attention. "Why not?" "Because she doesn't belong," Emily replied. "You know that." Harrison watched her carefully. "And you do?" he asked. Emily didn't hesitate. Yes, the certainty in her voice was different from Lena's, sharper, more practiced, more expected. "She's here because of what she gets out of it," Emily continued. "That's how this works." Harrison leaned back slightly, considering her words. "They're covering her mother's treatment," he said. Emily nodded. "Exactly." The answer came too quickly, too easily, like it had been waiting. "And you think that explains everything?" Harrison asked. Emily tilted her head slightly. "Doesn't it?" Harrison didn't respond, because something didn't add up, if that were the case. If it were really that simple, then why hadn't Lena fought him? Why hadn't she argued? Why hadn't she tried to convince him she was worth keeping? People who needed something always fought for it. They pushed, they insisted, they stayed. She hadn't. The door opened again. Daniel stepped back inside, his expression more serious than before. "Harrison," he said, "I found her." Harrison sat up slightly. "Where?" Daniel hesitated. "In the service wing," he said, "with one of the staff members." Emily frowned. "What does that mean?" Daniel glanced briefly at her, then back at Harrison. "She was helping him," he said. "He injured his knee earlier this week. She's been checking on him regularly." Harrison blinked. "What?" Daniel continued. "She also spent part of the morning arranging meals for one of the temporary workers who hasn't been able to come in." Quietly, without asking for anything. Silence filled the room, heavy, uncomfortable. Emily let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "That doesn't mean anything," she said quickly. "People like her." But she stopped, because Harrison was looking at her, not the way he had before. Not with confusion, not with distance, but with something sharper, something questioning. "People like her what?" he asked. Emily hesitated, for the first time since she entered the room. "It's just how they operate," she said, her voice less certain now. Harrison didn't look convinced, at all. He leaned back slowly, his gaze drifting toward the window. Rain still clung to the glass. The world outside blurred and distant, but inside, something had come into focus. Not completely, not clearly, but enough to create doubt. And doubt was dangerous, because it meant he might be wrong. And Harrison Whitmore didn't like being wrong. Not about business, not about people, and especially not about the woman who had stood in front of him and walked away without asking for anything. That was the problem. Harrison couldn't ignore it anymore. By late afternoon, he insisted on getting out of bed. The doctor protested, of course, talking about recovery time, muscle weakness, the risks of pushing too soon. But Harrison had spent months trapped inside his own body. He wasn't about to stay still any longer. "Just a few minutes," he said firmly. "I need to see something." Margaret watched him carefully from across the room. "You should rest," she said. "I've been resting for 3 months," he replied. There was no argument after that. Within minutes, a nurse helped him sit upright, his legs unsteady as they touched the ground for the first time. The sensation alone was overwhelming, like stepping into a body that wasn't fully his yet. Weak, slow, but alive, he took one step, then another, each one deliberate, each one reminding him exactly how much he had lost, and how much he still controlled. "Where is she?" he asked again. Daniel, standing nearby, didn't hesitate this time. "In the service wing," he said. Harrison nodded once. "Take me there." The service wing felt like a different world. Gone were the polished floors and silent hallways. Here the lights were brighter, harsher. The walls were plain. The air carried the scent of cleaning supplies and something faintly metallic. Real, unfiltered. Harrison slowed as they turned the corner. And then he saw her. Lena sat on a low stool beside an older man, the same one from the hallway days before. His leg was stretched out in front of him, an ice pack resting carefully against his knee. She was talking, not formally, not carefully, just talking. "You need to keep it elevated," she was saying, her voice calm but firm. "And don't try to push through the pain. That's how it gets worse." The man nodded, listening. "I'll be fine," he said. "You say that now," Lena replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "But I've seen how this goes." She adjusted the ice pack gently, her movements precise, practiced. Harrison stood still, watching. There was no performance in what she was doing. No audience, no expectation of reward. Just care. Pure, uncomplicated, the kind he hadn't seen in a very long time. "Why are you doing this?" the man asked her. Lena shrugged slightly. "Because it needs to be done. Simple. That was all." Harrison felt something shift in his chest, not dramatic, not immediate, but undeniable. "Miss Carter." The voice came from behind him, sharp, controlled. Emily, she had followed. Of course she had. Lena looked up, surprised. Then her eyes moved past Emily and landed on Harrison. For a moment, everything stilled. The noise, the movement, even the air seemed to pause. He was standing, alive, watching her, and she didn't know what to do with that. Neither did he. "You shouldn't be here," Emily said, stepping forward. "This isn't your place." Lena's gaze didn't leave Harrison. "I know," she said quietly. Her honesty hit him again. Unexpected, unfiltered. "I was just helping," she added. Emily let out a small, dismissive breath. "That's what you keep saying." Lena didn't respond to that. Instead, she stood slowly, wiping her hands on a cloth. "You should be resting," she said to Harrison. Her voice was steady, neutral, like the conversation from the day before had never happened. Like his words hadn't mattered. That bothered him more than he expected. "You didn't come back," he said. The question slipped out before he could stop it. Lena paused, just slightly. Then she met his gaze fully. "I didn't think you wanted me to." There it was. No accusation, no anger, just truth. Harrison felt it settle somewhere deeper than he intended. Emily crossed her arms. "This is exactly what I was talking about," she said. "She's playing a part." Lena didn't even look at her. "I'm not playing anything," she said quietly. "Then what are you doing?" Emily pressed. Lena hesitated, not because she didn't have an answer, but because the answer didn't fit this place. "I'm staying," she said finally. The words hung in the air. Harrison studied her. "You don't have to," he said. Lena's expression softened, just slightly. "I know," another pause. Then, "But I said I would." Simple, again. No conditions, no expectations, just a choice. And for the first time, Harrison didn't see a transaction. He saw something else, something unfamiliar, something he couldn't quite define. Emily stepped closer, her voice sharper now. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You don't owe her anything. She's here because she benefits from it." Lena finally looked at her. And this time there was something different in her gaze. Not anger, not fear, just clarity. "I'm here because I chose to be," she said. Emily scoffed. "That's not how this works. Maybe not for you," Lena replied softly. The tension snapped tight. Harrison felt it, saw it, understood it. Two worlds, colliding, and him, standing in the middle. Before he could say anything, a voice echoed down the hallway. "Lena!" She turned instantly. A young staff member was running toward her, panic in his eyes. "It's your mom," he said breathlessly. "The hospital called. Something's wrong." Everything changed. Lena's face drained of color. "What?" she whispered. "They said her condition. She's not responding." She didn't wait, didn't think. She moved, fast. Harrison took a step forward, instinct kicking in despite the weakness in his body. "Wait." But she was already gone. The sound of her footsteps echoed down the hall, fading quickly, leaving silence behind. Heavy, sudden. Harrison stood there, his chest tight. Something had just shifted again. But this time, It wasn't subtle, and he had a feeling everything was about to break. The moment Lena disappeared down the hallway, something inside Harrison refused to stay still. It wasn't logic. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't control. It was instinct, and he hadn't listened to that in a long time. "Get the car," he said suddenly. Daniel turned. "You shouldn't be. I said get the car." There was no room for argument. Even Emily fell silent. Harrison moved forward, slower than he wanted, his body still weak but his mind sharper than ever. Each step reminded him of how much strength he had lost and how much he was willing to push past. Because for the first time since waking up, something mattered more than control. The hospital was colder than he remembered. Or maybe he was just more aware now. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as Harrison walked through the hallway, Daniel at his side, nurses stepping out of the way as they recognized him. He didn't slow down, didn't stop until he saw her. Lena stood outside the room, her hands trembling, her back pressed against the wall like she was trying to hold herself together. For a second, Harrison didn't move. He just watched. The girl who had stood so steady in front of him now looked like she might collapse. "Lena." His voice was quieter than he expected. She looked up, and for the first time since he had opened his eyes, he saw fear in hers, not for herself, for someone else. "She's not waking up," Lena whispered. Words broke as they left her lips. Harrison stepped closer. "What happened?" "They said it's complications," she said, shaking her head. "They said they're trying everything, but—" Her voice caught. She pressed her lips together, forcing herself not to fall apart. "I told her I'd be back," she added, barely audible. "I told her everything would be okay." Harrison didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to moments like this. He wasn't used to people who felt things this deeply, without hiding it. "Can I see her?" he asked. Lena hesitated, then nodded. They stepped into the room together. It was smaller than his, simpler. No polished walls, no expensive machines, just the basics. Just enough. Lena's mother lay in the bed, her breathing shallow, her face pale under the soft light. Harrison stood at the foot of the bed, his hands at his sides. For a moment, he didn't feel like himself, didn't feel like the man people expected him to be. He just felt present. "She raised me by herself," Lena said quietly. He turned. She had moved to the bedside, her hand resting gently over her mother's. "She worked 2 jobs," she continued. "Sometimes 3. She never complained." Her voice steadied as she spoke, like the memories were holding her up. She always said, "If you can help someone, you do it, no matter what it costs." Harrison listened, really listened. "And that's why you stayed," he said. Lena didn't look at him. "I told you," she said softly. "I said I would. No conditions, no expectations, just truth." The room fell quiet again, but this silence felt different. Not empty, not distant, just real. Harrison glanced at the machines, at the monitors, at the small signs of a system trying to keep someone alive. Then he looked back at Lena. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," he said. She let out a small, broken laugh. "I always have." The words weren't bitter, they were just facts, and somehow that made them heavier. Harrison felt something tighten in his chest again, something unfamiliar, something he couldn't ignore anymore. He stepped forward, not thinking, not calculating, just acting. "I'll take care of it," he said. Lena frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, his voice firm now, "whatever she needs, doctors, treatment, specialists, you'll have it." Lena shook her head immediately. "No, I didn't ask for that. I know. Then why? Because I want to. The words came out before he could stop them, before he could soften them. And once they were out, he didn't take them back. Lena stared at him, trying to understand, trying to find the condition behind the offer, the price. There had to be one. There always was. You don't owe me anything, she said carefully. Harrison met her gaze. For the first time, he replied, I think I do. The truth settled between them, quiet, unavoidable. Lena didn't speak, didn't argue, because something in his voice told her, this wasn't a transaction, this wasn't control, this was something else, something new. A doctor entered the room, breaking the moment. We're stabilizing her condition, he said, but we'll need to move quickly. Harrison nodded. Do whatever it takes, he said. The doctor blinked, then nodded back. Yes, sir. As the doctor moved to adjust the equipment, Lena stepped back slightly, her eyes still on Harrison. You didn't have to come, she said. He looked at her. I know. Another pause, then. But I wanted to. The words felt unfamiliar, but right, and for the first time since he had opened his eyes, Harrison Whitmore wasn't acting out of obligation, or expectation, or control. He was choosing to stay, choosing to help, choosing her. And somewhere deep inside, that choice was changing everything. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where everything suddenly made sense. No grand realization that erased the past or rewrote what had already been said. Instead, it unfolded slowly, like morning light creeping into a dark room. Subtle, steady, impossible to stop once it began. Lena's mother stabilized 2 days later, not fully recovered, not out of danger, but breathing on her own, strong enough to hold Lena's hand, strong enough to open her eyes. That was enough. For Lena, it felt like everything. She sat beside the hospital bed, her fingers wrapped gently around her mother's, the tension that had lived in her body for days finally beginning to loosen. You're not getting rid of me that easily, her mother whispered, her voice weak but teasing. Lena laughed softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. I wasn't planning to, she said. From the doorway, Harrison watched. He didn't interrupt, didn't step in. He just stayed. And for the first time, he understood something he had missed before. This wasn't obligation. This wasn't survival. This was love, the kind that didn't ask for anything in return, the kind that stayed, even when it had every reason to leave. Weeks passed. Harrison recovered faster than expected. Physical therapy became part of his routine. Early mornings, controlled movements, rebuilding strength piece by piece. His body remembered what his mind already knew. Control, discipline, progress. But something else changed too, something less visible. He started asking questions, not about business, not about the company, about her. What did you do before all this? He asked one afternoon, watching Lena fold a stack of linens in the quiet sitting room. She paused, then shrugged slightly. A little bit of everything, she said, mostly work that nobody notices. He studied her. That doesn't sound like everything. It's enough, she replied. That was always her answer, simple, complete, and frustrating, because he wanted more, wanted to understand. But Lena didn't offer explanations the way other people did. She didn't justify her choices, she just made them. The Whitmore house began to feel different, not because of Harrison, but because of Lena. She didn't try to change anything, didn't demand space, didn't claim authority. But somehow things shifted around her anyway. Staff who once avoided eye contact now greeted her quietly. The older groundskeeper waved when she passed. Even the kitchen, once cold and distant, felt warmer when she stepped inside, because she saw people, and when you're seen, you start to exist differently. Harrison noticed that too, more than he expected. One evening, he found her in the back garden, The air was cool, the city lights flickering faintly in the distance beyond the trees. Lena sat on a wooden bench, a small piece of fabric in her hands, a needle moving carefully through it. "You sew," he said. She looked up, slightly surprised. "Sometimes." He stepped closer, watching the pattern take shape. "What is it?" "A design my mom taught me," she said. "I used to make things when I couldn't afford to buy them." Harrison sat down beside her, carefully, still adjusting to the weight of his own body. "You're good," he said. Lena smiled faintly. "I had a lot of practice." There was a quiet pause. Then, "I'm leaving," she said. The words landed softly, but they hit harder than anything else. Harrison turned to her. "What?" Lena set the fabric down in her lap. "My mom's stable," she said. "The treatment is covered. She's going to be okay." "That's good," he replied automatically. "It is." Another pause, then, "That means I don't need to stay anymore." The truth settled between them, clear, unavoidable. Harrison felt something tighten in his chest again. "You're still my wife," he said. Lena met his gaze. "For now." The words were gentle but firm. "This was never meant to be permanent," she continued. "You know that." He did, but hearing it was different. "I'm not asking you to leave," he said. "I know. Then why?" "Because I want to leave the right way." That stopped him. Lena picked up the fabric again, her fingers stilling as she looked at it. "I don't want to stay here because I'm afraid," she said. "Or because I feel like I owe something." Her voice softened. "I want to know that if I stay, it's because I choose to." Harrison didn't speak because he understood more than he expected. "And right now?" he asked quietly. Lena looked at him. Really looked at him. "I don't know yet." The honesty in her voice didn't hurt. It grounded him, because for the first time, there were no illusions, no roles, no expectations, just two people trying to figure out what came next. "I'm going back to Brooklyn," she added. "There's a place I used to volunteer. They need help, and I want to start something of my own." "What kind of something?" he asked. Lena's eyes lit up slightly. "A small studio," she said. "Teaching women how to sew, how to build something for themselves, like my mom taught me." Harrison watched her, the way she spoke, the way the idea came alive in her voice. "You already know how to do that," he said. "I know how to try. That's enough." She smiled faintly. "It has to be." Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was open, like a space waiting to be filled. Harrison leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting toward the city lights. "I can help you," he said. Lena shook her head immediately. "No, not like that," he clarified. "Not as a favor, not as anything you owe me." She hesitated, then looked at him again. "Then how?" Harrison met her gaze. "Because I want to," he said. The same words, but different now, stronger, more certain. Lena studied him for a long moment, trying to understand, trying to believe, and maybe starting to. The next morning, Lena packed her things, not much, just what she had brought with her, because despite everything, she had never really belonged to that world. As she stepped outside, the early sunlight painted the driveway in soft gold. The city beyond waited, loud, messy, real. Harrison stood at the top of the steps, watching, not stopping her, not asking her to stay, just letting her go, because this time, it had to be her choice. And as Lena walked down the path, her steps steady, her head held just a little higher, he realized something he hadn't expected. He wasn't losing her. He was finally giving her the freedom to choose him. Or not. And for the first time in his life, that felt like the only thing that mattered. Brooklyn didn't welcome Lena with open arms. It never had. The streets were the same, Cracked sidewalks, faded storefronts. The hum of traffic blending with distant sirens and voices drifting through the air. The smell of fried food from a corner shop mixed with the sharp scent of rain still clinging to the pavement. But this time, it felt different, not easier, just hers. Lena unlocked the door to the small space she had managed to rent. A narrow storefront tucked between a laundromat and a closed-up bakery. The paint was peeling, the windows needed cleaning. The floors creaked when she stepped inside, but it was enough. It was hers. She set her bag down slowly, taking in the empty room. "This is it," she whispered. No marble floors, no quiet staff, no polished walls hiding every flaw. Just space, possibility, and for the first time in a long time, hope that belonged to her. The first few weeks were hard, harder than she expected. Supplies cost more than she planned. The sewing machines she found were old, stubborn, and unpredictable. Some days, no one came. Other days, one or two women stepped inside, hesitant, unsure if they belonged. Lena greeted every one of them the same way, with patience, with warmth, with the same quiet belief she had carried her entire life. That people mattered. That effort mattered. That kindness, even when unseen, still meant something. At night she stayed, fixing torn fabric, sketching patterns, planning lessons that might never be used. But she didn't stop, because this time, she wasn't waiting for someone else to choose her. She was choosing herself. Harrison didn't visit, not right away, not because he didn't want to, but because he understood something now that he hadn't before. If he showed up too soon, it would mean nothing. So he waited. He worked. He rebuilt his strength, his routine, his control over the life he had nearly lost. But the city felt different now, sharper, more real, because somewhere inside it, she existed, not as his responsibility, not as his obligation, but as someone who had walked away and still mattered. One afternoon, weeks later, Harrison stood outside a narrow storefront in Brooklyn. The sign above the door was simple: Carter Studio. No gold lettering, no polished glass, just hand-painted letters, slightly uneven, but steady. He didn't move right away, just stood there, watching. Through the window, he saw her. Lena stood beside a young woman, guiding her hands carefully over a piece of fabric, her voice calm, encouraging. "No, like this," she said softly. "Don't rush it. Let the thread follow your hand." The girl nodded, trying again. Lena smiled, not the quiet smile she had worn in his house, but something fuller, something freer. Harrison felt something shift again, not confusion, not doubt, just certainty. He stepped inside, the bell above the door chimed softly. Lena looked up for a moment. She didn't react, like she wasn't sure if he was real. Then the recognition settled, slowly, steadily. "You found it," she said. Her voice wasn't surprised, just warm. "I had help," he replied. A small pause, then, "I like what you've done with it." Lena glanced around, a faint smile touching her lips. "It's not much, it's everything," he said. She met his gaze, and for the first time, there was no distance between them. No misunderstanding, no assumption, just truth. "Why are you here?" she asked. The question was gentle, but it mattered. Harrison stepped closer. Not too close, just enough. "Because I needed to be," he said. Lena studied him, waiting. This time, he didn't rush, didn't calculate, didn't hide behind control. "I've spent my whole life making decisions based on what makes sense," he continued. "What's efficient? What works?" A faint breath. "But you don't work like that." Lena's lips curved slightly. "No," she said. "I didn't understand that before," he admitted. "I thought everything had a reason, a trade, a cost. And now?" Harrison met her eyes. "Now I think some things don't need one." Silence settled between them, soft, open, and then he reached into his pocket, not for a contract, not for anything binding, just a small, simple box. Lena's breath caught slightly. "This isn't the same as before," he said quietly. "There's no agreement, no conditions." He opened the box, a ring, simple, elegant, nothing excessive, just enough. "I don't want the life we were given," he said. "I want the one we choose." The words settled deep, honest, unfiltered. "Lena Carter," he continued, his voice steady. "Will you stay? Not because you have to, but because you want to." The room felt still, the world outside faded, all the noise, all the doubt, all the past, gone, just this moment. Lena looked at him, really looked, at the man who had once reduced her to a transaction, the man who had learned, changed, chosen, and for the first time, she didn't feel small in his world. She felt equal. "I didn't come into your life because I had a choice," she said softly. Harrison didn't interrupt. "I stayed because your mother treated me like I mattered." A breath. "I trusted you because you finally listened." Another. "And I love you because you see me." The words landed like light, gentle, certain. She smiled, small but real. "Yes," she said. Harrison let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. And just like that, everything changed. Not with force, not with control, but with choice. Months later, the studio was full. Laughter, voices, the hum of machines. Women working, learning, building something that belonged to them. On the wall, a small framed photo hung near the window, Lena's mother, smiling, watching. And beside it, a new photo, Lena and Harrison, standing together, not in a mansion, not in a boardroom, but here, in the life they had built, together. And as Lena rested her hand gently over her stomach, a quiet smile forming on her lips, she realized something she had never believed before. Kindness had never been wasted. It had just been waiting for the right life to return it. When Lena stood in that small Brooklyn studio, choosing Harrison not out of fear, but out of love, that was the moment everything finally meant something. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is keep showing up with quiet honesty, even when the world misunderstands you. Because real change doesn't come from words. It comes from the way you live when no one is watching. So today, think about one moment where you almost walked away, but didn't. Maybe like Lena, that choice is already shaping a future you can't see yet. If this story touched you, comment one below. And tell me, have you ever stayed in something not because you had to, but because you chose to? There's another story coming next, and this one might hit even closer to home.